I stood outside the church doors, banned from my own grandson's wedding. My daughter-in-law said I'd embarrass the family, but when Michael opened the envelope I sent, he walked straight off the altar and... Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing in a church parking lot, listening to my grandson's wedding through closed doors. The same doors I'd walked through for every important moment of Michael's life. His baptism, his first communion, his high school girlfriend's funeral when that terrible car accident took her. I was always there, holding his hand, wiping his tears, celebrating his joys. But on the most important day of his life, I was banished to the parking lot like a stranger. For 43 years, I was the heart of our family. People used to say the Thompsons were blessed because we had each other, and I took pride in keeping us all connected. When my husband Paul passed away 10 years ago from a sudden heart attack, everyone thought I'd crumble. Instead, I became stronger, knowing my family needed me more than ever. I was the one who made sure nobody spent holidays alone, who remembered every birthday, who kept Paul's memory alive through stories and traditions. But my real contribution to this family goes deeper than Sunday dinners and birthday cards. When Michael was 3 years old, Patricia and my son Robert came to me with tears in their eyes. They were both climbing the corporate ladder, working 70-hour weeks, and their marriage was cracking under the pressure. Patricia had just gotten a promotion that required international travel. Robert was finishing his medical residency. They needed help. I didn't hesitate. Michael moved into my house for 3 years. 3 years of morning pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, afternoon trips to the park, bedtime stories about brave knights and kind dragons. I taught him to tie his shoes, to write his name, to say please and thank you. When he had nightmares, it was my bed he climbed into. When he got chicken pox, I was the one rubbing calamine lotion on his spots at 2 a.m. while singing his favorite lullabies. I sold my mother's jewelry collection, pieces that had been in our family for generations, to help Patricia and Robert put a down payment on their first house. When Patricia's father died and left her nothing because of their estrangement, I paid for the funeral she couldn't afford. When Robert's medical school loans were crushing them, I refinanced my house to help. Never asked for a penny back. Never reminded them. That's what family does. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I looked at Michael. He grew into such a remarkable young man. Kind, intelligent, loyal. He proposed to Emma at the same spot where his grandfather had proposed to me 50 years ago. He still called me every Sunday night, still brought me tulips on the first day of spring because he knew they were my favorites. That's why standing outside that church, hearing the organ play the wedding march I'd helped choose, knowing my seat in the front row sat empty, felt like a knife through my heart. How had I become the woman who would embarrass the family I'd spent my entire life building? 3 months before the wedding, life was absolutely perfect. It was one of those golden periods where everything felt right with the world. Michael had just gotten promoted to senior architect at his firm, and he was designing sustainable homes that would help young families afford their first houses. Every Tuesday after work, he'd stop by my house without fail. We had our routine down to a science. He'd let himself in with his key, calling out, "Grandma, I'm home," just like he did when he was 7, and I'd have Earl Grey tea steeping in the china teapot that belonged to his great-grandmother. We'd sit in the sunroom, the late afternoon light streaming through the windows I'd lined with potted orchids and African violets. Michael would flip through the old photo albums I kept on the coffee table, laughing at pictures of his father with 1980s hair or pointing out how much Emma looked like me in my wedding photos. He'd tell me about his latest projects, his dreams of starting his own firm someday, and the honeymoon plans he was secretly arranging to surprise Emma. I lived for those Tuesday afternoons. Emma had become like the granddaughter I never had. She'd join us some Tuesdays, bringing her infectious laugh and stories from her job as a pediatric nurse. The way she looked at Michael reminded me of how Paul used to look at me, with complete adoration mixed with playful mischief. She'd help me in the kitchen, eager to learn our family recipes. I taught her how to make Michael's favorite pot roast, the secret to getting the Yorkshire puddings to rise perfectly, and Paul's mother's apple pie recipe that had never been written down before. Patricia seemed happier than I'd seen her in years. We'd meet for lunch every other Thursday at the small cafe downtown. She'd show me Pinterest boards for the reception decorations, asking my opinion on centerpieces and color schemes. She even asked me to go wedding dress shopping with her and Emma, saying she valued my traditional sense of style. We spent a wonderful afternoon in boutiques, Patricia actually linking arms with me as we walked, something she hadn't done in years. She bought a stunning sapphire blue dress that complemented her eyes perfectly. I was deep into my own wedding preparations, working on my contribution to their special day. Every Thompson wedding for 4 generations had featured hand-embroidered handkerchiefs for the wedding party. My grandmother had taught me the delicate stitching when I was 12, and I'd spent hours in the evening working on them. Michael's had his initials intertwined with Emma's, surrounded by tiny forget-me-nots. Emma's featured white roses and baby's breath. Each one took about 20 hours to complete. But seeing Michael's face when I showed him the tradition would continue made every minute worth it. Robert would drop by on weekends, often bringing fresh bread from the bakery near his practice. He'd fix things around the house without being asked, replacing washers and dripping faucets or adjusting sticky doors. We'd talk about the grandson he and Patricia never gave me, and he'd get quiet, mentioning they'd been trying for years. I'd pat his hand, telling him Michael was enough blessing for all of us. Life felt complete. The family felt united. I went to bed each night thanking God for the peace we'd finally found. I had no idea the storm that was brewing. The first sign came on a Wednesday morning, 2 months before the wedding. Patricia had asked me to share my famous roast recipe, the one Michael had specifically requested for the reception dinner. It was Paul's mother's recipe, refined over decades, with a secret blend of herbs and a special technique for keeping the meat tender even when cooking for large groups. I'd written it out by hand on my nice stationery, including every tip and timing note I'd learned over 40 years of making it. I called Patricia to make sure she received the recipe and to offer to cook a practice run with the caterers. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. That was unusual. Patricia always answered my calls, especially now with wedding planning in full swing. I left a cheerful message and tried again that afternoon. Nothing. The next morning, still nothing. By Thursday afternoon, I'd left 3 messages, each one trying to hide the growing concern in my voice. When she finally called back Friday evening, something was off immediately. Her voice had that clipped, professional tone she used with difficult clients at her marketing firm. "Oh, Margaret, yes, I got the recipe. Actually, we've decided to go with a professional chef instead. More modern, you understand. The chef has his own signature dishes. Young people expect something different these days." Before I could respond or even ask which chef, she added, "I have to run. Conference call with Tokyo in 5 minutes." The line went dead before I could mention that Michael had specifically asked for my roast, that he'd told me just last Tuesday it wouldn't feel like a real celebration without it. I stood in my kitchen, still holding the phone, staring at the extra copy of the recipe I'd laminated for the caterers. The silence felt heavy, wrong somehow. Patricia never had conference calls with Tokyo. Her firm handled domestic accounts exclusively. That weekend, I saw Patricia's car at the wedding venue when I drove past on my way to the grocery store. My heart lifted, thinking she might want to surprise me with a venue visit, but when I called to see if I should stop by, she didn't answer. 20 minutes later, she texted, "Sorry, not at venue. Running errands." But I could see her car clearly from the road, that distinctive scratch on the bumper from when she'd backed into my garden statue last Christmas. The following week brought more strange moments. She canceled our Thursday lunch, claiming a stomach bug. But Emma mentioned they'd gone bridesmaid dress shopping that same day. When I offered to help with addressing invitations, Patricia said they were using an online system instead, more efficient. Yet, I'd seen the beautiful calligraphy envelopes at her house just the week before. She'd specifically asked for my mother's address book to make sure she didn't miss any family members. Each interaction felt like trying to hold water in my hands. Pleasant enough on the surface, but something essential was slipping away. The warmth in her voice when she'd linked arms with me during dress shopping had been replaced by something hollow, calculated. She answered my questions but never elaborated. She responded to texts but never initiated. Our Thursday lunches stopped altogether after that one cancellation. I told myself wedding planning was stressful. I reminded myself that Patricia had always been high-strung, even in the best of times. But deep in my stomach, that instinct every woman has, every mother knows, was starting to whisper that something was very wrong. I spent the next 2 weeks constructing elaborate explanations for Patricia's behavior. Wedding planning was stressful, I told myself as I watered my garden each morning. The modern world moved so fast with emails and digital invitations and coordination between vendors. Patricia was juggling her demanding career with planning a 200-guest wedding. Of course, she was overwhelmed. When had I ever planned something this large while working full-time? Never. I'd been a homemaker when Robert got married, able to devote myself entirely to the preparations. Standing in my kitchen one evening, I prepared Patricia's favorite meal, honey-glazed salmon with asparagus and wild rice. She'd been looking thin lately, probably skipping meals with all the stress. I carefully packed everything into my good containers, the glass ones she'd given me for Christmas, and drove to their house. The porch light was on, both cars in the driveway. Through the window, I could see the flicker of the television in the living room. When Patricia answered the door, she looked at me like I was selling magazines. Not hostile exactly, just blank, as if she couldn't quite place why I was standing there with food containers. "Oh, Margaret," she said, not opening the door wider. "We already ate." It was 6:15 p.m. They never ate before 7. I could smell takeout Chinese from inside, could see the containers on the coffee table behind her. "I thought you might be too busy to cook," I said, keeping my voice bright. "This will keep for tomorrow. Your favorite salmon." I tried to hand her the containers, but she just stared at them. Finally, she took them with the same enthusiasm someone might accept a jury duty summons. "You're working too hard, dear," I added, reaching out to touch her arm. She actually stepped back. Just a small step, but I felt it like a slap. "Thanks," she mumbled, already closing the door. "I'm actually on a deadline. Big presentation tomorrow." The door shut before I could wish her luck. I stood on the porch I'd helped them paint, beside the swing Robert had installed for future grandchildren, and told myself she was just stressed. The presentation must be important. Maybe it was for a promotion. That would explain everything. Driving home, I stopped at 3 red lights and used each one to list reasons for Patricia's coldness: work stress, wedding expenses. Maybe she and Robert were having marriage troubles. Maybe they were trying IVF again and the hormones were affecting her mood. By the time I pulled into my garage, I'd convinced myself I was being oversensitive. Paul always said I read too much into things, that I could find meaning in the way someone buttered their toast. That night, I called my sister Ruth in Phoenix. I explained the situation, trying to sound casual, laughing about being a worried mother-in-law. Ruth listened quietly, then said, "Margaret, honey, when someone shows you who they are, believe them." But I wasn't ready to believe. Not yet. This was Patricia, who'd cried in my arms when her father died, who'd named her miscarried baby after my mother, who'd written in last year's Mother's Day card that I was the mother she'd always wished for. I went to bed that night listing all the times Patricia had shown me love. It was a long list, long enough to drown out the voice whispering that something had fundamentally changed. I wasn't ready to hear it yet. 2 weeks before the wedding, I ran into Emma's mother, Linda, at the Whole Foods on Maple Street. I was selecting flowers for Sunday dinner, thinking sunflowers might brighten everyone's mood, when I heard her calling my name. Linda approached with a cart full of party supplies: elegant cocktail napkins, gold plastic champagne flutes, ribbon in the exact shade of dusty rose Emma had chosen for the wedding. She was beaming with that pre-wedding excitement every mother of the bride carries. "Margaret, oh, what perfect timing." She pulled me into a warm hug, the kind Patricia hadn't given me in weeks. "I wanted to thank you for that beautiful handkerchief you made for Emma. She actually cried when she opened it. Happy tears, of course." Her face suddenly shifted to confusion. "But I thought you were in Florida. Visiting your sister or cousin," Patricia said. "Something about a family emergency?" My heart stopped. The sunflowers in my hand suddenly felt heavy. "Florida? I... No, Ruth lives in Phoenix and I haven't... When did Patricia say this?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but Linda must have heard something because her expression grew concerned. "At the menu tasting on Tuesday. Patricia said you'd planned this Florida trip months ago, couldn't reschedule. She felt terrible you'd miss it, kept apologizing to the chef that you couldn't be there to guide the roast preparation. She even said you'd sent detailed notes from Florida to make sure they got your recipe right." Linda touched my arm gently. "Margaret, are you okay? You've gone pale." Tuesday. I remembered Tuesday perfectly. I'd spent the entire day at home, hoping Patricia might call about the menu tasting I knew was scheduled. I'd even kept my phone volume on high, checking it every few minutes like a teenage girl waiting for a boy to call. I'd made notes about wine pairings, about the vegetarian options for Robert's colleague, about the special dessert Michael loved that looked like chocolate, but was actually carob because he was allergic to cocoa. "The menu tasting," I said slowly. "Patricia said the caterer had rescheduled it. Conflict with another event." The lie came automatically, protecting Patricia even as the evidence of her deception lay bare between Linda and me. But Linda was already shaking her head. "No, it's been scheduled for months. Patricia even sent a group text about it." She said. Linda pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. Here it is. She wrote, "Unfortunately, Margaret can't make it due to a family obligation, but she sent her input, and I'll make sure all her suggestions are included." She showed me the screen. There it was, sent to Emma, Linda, Patricia's sister Jennifer, and 3 other family members. Everyone but me. Linda kept talking, showing me photos from the tasting, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. In one photo, Patricia stood where I should have been, sampling the roast that was supposedly prepared with my detailed notes from a trip I'd never taken. She was smiling, raising a glass of the wine I'd recommended for the meat course. In another, she posed with the chef, holding my laminated recipe card, the one I'd prepared for them. "Margaret?" Linda's voice brought me back. "There's something else. Patricia told the chef you were getting forgetful, mixing up dates. She said that's why you thought the tasting was rescheduled. She asked us all to be patient with you, said this age-related confusion has been happening more often." The sunflowers slipped from my numb fingers, scattering across the grocery store floor. The call from Michael came 3 days later on a quiet Sunday evening. I was sitting in Paul's old leather chair trying to focus on a crossword puzzle when his ringtone filled the room. His voice was different from the moment he said hello, shaky, confused, like when he was 8 and couldn't understand why his goldfish had died despite him doing everything right. "Grandma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. "Mom says you're not coming to the wedding. She said you agreed it would be better, that you understood why. But that doesn't sound like you at all." The room started spinning. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white against the black case. "Michael, sweetheart, what are you talking about? Of course I'm coming to your wedding. I've had my dress for months. The lavender one you helped me pick out, remember?" Silence stretched between us. Then, his voice cracking. "Mom said you've been having memory issues, that you might cause a scene. She showed me a video of you confused at the grocery store, stumbling around, talking to yourself. She said Aunt Ruth called her worried about your behavior in Phoenix. Grandma, she made it sound like you have dementia." My chest felt like it was collapsing. The video. I knew exactly what video she meant. 6 months ago, I'd had a diabetic episode at the store when I'd skipped lunch while running errands. My blood sugar had dropped dangerously low. An employee had helped me to a bench, given me orange juice, and stayed with me until I felt better. Patricia had been there, had driven me to the doctor afterward. She'd seen the medical report clearly stating hypoglycemia, not confusion. She'd been there when the doctor adjusted my medication and said it was completely manageable. Michael, that video was from a diabetic episode. One time. 6 months ago. Your mother was there when the doctor explained everything. I'm not losing my mind. I take my medication, I check my blood sugar, and I haven't had a single issue since. My voice was stronger now, fueled by indignation. And I haven't been to Phoenix in 2 years. Ruth would laugh if anyone said I'd visited recently. I heard Michael's sharp intake of breath. She lied? Mom actually lied about all of this? The pain in his voice broke my heart. This was his mother, the woman he'd defended through every argument, whose approval he'd sought his entire life. There's more, he said quietly. Dad's been going along with it. He told me you've been acting erratic, making scenes at family dinners, forgetting important dates. But Grandma, I was at every family dinner. You never made any scene. You never forgot anything. Why would they do this? Through the window, I could see the house across the street where Michael had played as a child, where normal families were having normal Sunday dinners, where grandmothers weren't being erased from their grandsons' lives. I don't know, sweetheart, I whispered, though parts of me were beginning to understand. But I promise you, I'm the same grandmother who taught you to ride a bike, who sat with you through every thunderstorm, who loves you more than words can say. They already told everyone, Michael said, his voice hollow. The seating chart's been redone. Your name's not even on the program anymore. Emma called me 2 days after Michael's devastating revelation. Her voice was hushed, urgent. Mrs. Thompson, I'm in my car outside your house. Can I come in? I have something you need to know, and I don't want to discuss it over the phone. Within minutes, she was sitting at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, her engagement ring catching the light as she trembled slightly. I overheard something I wasn't supposed to, she began, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of anger and sympathy. Patricia was in the study with the door closed, but I'd come home early from my shift. She was on speakerphone with someone, a lawyer, I think. She was asking about power of attorney procedures, about what constitutes mental incompetence, about how to prove someone can't manage their own affairs. My blood ran cold as Emma continued. She specifically mentioned your house, Mrs. Thompson. She said, and I'm quoting here, the property value has tripled in the last 5 years. We're talking about $2 million just sitting there with one old woman. There has to be a way. The room felt airless. My house. The house Paul and I had bought 42 years ago for $65,000, where we'd raised Robert, where every Christmas morning had been celebrated, where Paul had died peacefully in his sleep in our bedroom. The house in the historic district that developers had been circling like vultures ever since the tech companies moved into downtown. There's more, Emma said, pulling out her phone. I recorded part of the conversation. She played the recording, and Patricia's voice filled my kitchen, cold and calculating. The wedding exclusion is perfect. We have multiple witnesses who'll say she was too confused to attend. The grocery store incident, the fictional Florida trip confusion, it's all documented. Robert's on board. He knows we need this money. The IVF treatments alone cost $40,000, and if we sell that house, we could afford the best fertility clinics in the country. I had to sit down. Robert, my son, my baby boy, was part of this. The child I'd carried for 9 months, whose first word was Mama, who'd cried in my arms when Paul died, was plotting to steal my home by declaring me incompetent. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. I also found something else. Patricia's been in contact with Sunrise Estates, that luxury assisted living facility outside town. The one where you have to sign over your assets to get in. She's already filled out preliminary paperwork, Mrs. Thompson. She put herself down as your healthcare proxy. But I have a living will, I protested. My friend Helen is my healthcare proxy. It's all documented with my lawyer. Emma shook her head grimly. She's planning to contest it. She has a doctor lined up, someone from Robert's hospital who owes him favors. He's willing to write a competency evaluation without ever properly examining you. Patricia's been building this case for months, maybe longer. Every time you forgot where you put your reading glasses, every time you asked someone to repeat themselves, she was taking notes. The conspiracy was breathtaking in its scope. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign to steal my home, my dignity, my freedom. And they were using my grandson's wedding as the cornerstone of their plan. That night, after Emma left, I climbed the stairs to Michael's childhood room, each step feeling heavier than the last. I hadn't changed anything since he'd moved out for college. The baseball trophies still lined the shelf, dusty now but still gleaming gold in the lamplight. His high school graduation cap hung on the bedpost. The wall still bore the crayon marks from when he was 4, and decided to draw a rainbow for Grandma directly on the paint. I sat on his twin bed, the Star Wars comforter soft beneath my fingers, and picked up his baby shoes from the nightstand. White leather so tiny they fit in my palm, with a small scuff on the toe from when he'd learned to crawl. I remembered buying them with Patricia. She'd been 8 months pregnant, glowing with anticipation, holding my arm as we walked through the baby store. "You'll teach him everything, won't you, Mom?" she'd said. "You're so good with children." The tears started then, 30 years of memories flooding through me. Patricia dropping Michael off at 6 a.m. when he was 3. Her power suit perfectly pressed while his hair stuck up in sleepy tufts. "Important presentation," she'd say, kissing his head quickly before clicking away in her heels. I'd carry him to the kitchen, his small arms tight around my neck, whispering, "It's okay. Grandma's here." I remembered the chicken pox when he was 5. Patricia had called from a business trip in Seattle, frustrated that he'd gotten sick during her crucial merger negotiation. I'd spent 6 nights straight by his bed, dabbing calamine on each spot, making up stories about brave knights who got special powers from their chicken pox dots. When Patricia finally came home, Michael ran to me, not her, and I saw something harden in her eyes. The school plays she missed flooded back. 8 performances over the years where I sat in the front row, recording everything on the camcorder Paul had bought specifically for Michael's events. Patricia always had excuses: client dinners, quarterly reports, networking events. "You're so good at this, Margaret," she'd say. "He's lucky to have you." But now I wondered if she'd been building resentment with every missed moment, blaming me for being what she chose not to be. I found the Mother's Day card from 4th grade, Michael's careful handwriting saying, "To the best grandma who is like my mom." Patricia had seen it on my refrigerator and asked me to take it down when she visited. I'd thought she was embarrassed about her absence. Now I realized she was eliminating evidence of her neglect. The sobs came in waves. I pressed his baby shoes to my chest, remembering every fever I'd soothed, every nightmare I'd chased away, every scraped knee I'd bandaged. When his first girlfriend broke up with him, he'd come to me, not Patricia. When he got into his dream college, I was the first person he called. When he decided to propose to Emma, he asked for my blessing before anyone else's. I lay down on his small bed, curling up like I had when comforting him during thunderstorms. The room still smelled faintly of his teenage cologne and baseball glove leather. "I gave you everything," I whispered to the empty room, "every single piece of my heart, and you're using it to destroy me." The moon cast shadows through the window, the same window where we'd hung a bird feeder together when he was 7, watching cardinals come for breakfast. Now those shadows felt like prison bars, trapping me in a nightmare where love had become a weapon turned against me. At 3 a.m., I was still lying in Michael's bed, staring at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars still clung, their light long since faded. My tears had dried, leaving my face feeling tight and raw. I sat up slowly, my body aching from crying, and caught my reflection in the mirror above his dresser. The woman looking back at me seemed defeated, broken, exactly what Patricia wanted everyone to see. An old woman who'd lost her mind, who needed to be managed, controlled, erased. Then I saw it. On the dresser, partially hidden behind a participation trophy, sat Michael's old recorder from 5th grade band. The same recorder he'd practiced hot cross buns on until Paul and I thought we'd lose our minds. I picked it up and suddenly remembered something Patricia had said during that phone call Emma recorded. We have multiple witnesses. Witnesses to what? To lies. To fabrications. But Patricia had made one critical error in her carefully orchestrated plan. She'd forgotten that the woman she was trying to destroy was the same woman who'd raised her husband, who'd navigated Paul's cancer treatment, who'd fought insurance companies and won, who'd kept this family together through every crisis for 4 decades. I stood up, my knees creaking in protest, and walked to the window. Dawn was beginning to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere out there, Patricia was probably sleeping soundly, confident in her plan to steal my home and dignity. She thought she'd broken me. She thought excluding me from the wedding was the final nail in my coffin, proof of my irrelevance. No, I said out loud, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Not today, not ever. I walked downstairs to Paul's study, untouched since his death, except for weekly dusting. His laptop still sat on the desk, outdated now but functional. I opened it and began searching. Power of attorney laws in our state, elder abuse statutes, recording laws, document authentication requirements. With each search, my resolve strengthened. Patricia might have Robert's medical connections, but I had something more powerful, the truth and 40 years of learning how to protect what mattered. I thought about calling my sister Ruth, about crying to friends, about seeking sympathy. But sympathy wouldn't save my house. Tears wouldn't protect my dignity. This wasn't the time for the sweet, accommodating grandmother everyone expected. This was time for the woman who'd fought off a would-be burglar with nothing but a cast-iron skillet when Paul was traveling. The woman who'd stood up to the school board when they tried to cut Michael's art program. The woman who'd held this family together with pure will when everything else fell apart. I made coffee, strong and black, and sat at the kitchen table where I'd served thousands of meals to my family. Where Michael had done homework while I cooked, dinner. Where Patricia had cried about infertility while I held her hand. The same table where she'd plotted my downfall. You want to play games with evidence? I said to the empty kitchen. Fine, let's play. But sweetheart, you're playing against someone who taught your husband how to play chess. And in chess, the queen is always the most powerful piece on the board. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows, and Margaret Thompson was ready to fight. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with the methodical precision of a surgeon. First, I called my lawyer, Thomas Bradley, who'd handled Paul's estate. When I explained the situation, his sharp intake of breath told me everything. Margaret, this is attempted elder abuse and fraud. We need to document everything immediately. Within hours, I was in his office, signing papers to create an irrevocable trust that would transfer my house to Michael upon my death, with explicit provisions that it could never be sold or transferred while I was alive, regardless of my mental state. Thomas pulled up the state databases on his computer. Your medical records from 6 months ago are perfectly clear. The hospital's report explicitly states hypoglycemia, not dementia. I'm requesting certified copies of everything. He looked at me over his glasses. Margaret, do you have any documentation of the money you've given them over the years? I'd come prepared. From my folder, I pulled out 23 years of bank statements, highlighted and tabulated. Every check to Patricia and Robert marked loan in my register but never repaid, $47,000 in total. The down payment help, the fertility treatment contributions, the business trip Patricia took that was actually a vacation, the gambling debt Robert had hidden from his wife. I'd kept everything, Not from suspicion, but from habit. The same way I'd kept every Mother's Day card and school photo. Next came the witness statements. I met with 3 family members who'd noticed Patricia's treatment of me. Robert's cousin, Sandra, who'd witnessed Patricia rolling her eyes when I spoke at Easter dinner. My neighbor, Dorothy, who'd heard Patricia tell someone on the phone that the old Bat's house will be ours soon enough. The church organist, Helen, my designated healthcare proxy, who'd watched Patricia tell people I was confused when I'd simply questioned a change in wedding plans. The most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, my physician for 15 years, was furious when she heard about the competency claims. She provided a comprehensive evaluation from my physical just 3 weeks prior. Cognitive test scores in the 95th percentile for my age, perfect recall of medication schedules, no signs of dementia or confusion. I'll testify if needed, she said firmly. This is exactly the kind of elder abuse we're trained to watch for. But the masterstroke was the envelope for Michael. Inside, I placed the medical records, the trust documents, and a single photograph. 3-year-old Michael on my shoulders at the zoo, his arms spread wide like he could fly, while Patricia stood to the side checking her phone. On the back, I'd written in my steady handwriting, "Ask your mother why she needs my house when she already has my son." I also included a letter, carefully worded with Thomas's help, that laid out the facts without emotion. The money given over the years, the lies about Florida, the phone call about power of attorney, the assisted living facility paperwork, and one final question. If I'm truly losing my mind, why does your mother need to lie to everyone about it? The evening before the wedding, I gave the envelope to Helen with specific instructions. Give this to Michael right before the ceremony starts. Not before, not after. The moment he takes his place at the altar. She nodded, understanding the gravity of what I was asking. I stood in my bedroom that night, my lavender dress hanging on the closet door, and felt oddly calm. The trap was set. The truth was documented. Now all that remained was to see if my grandson would choose comfortable lies or difficult truths. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect September mornings that seemed to mock the turmoil in my heart. I dressed carefully in my lavender dress, the one Michael had helped me choose at the boutique downtown. "You look like a queen, Grandma," he'd said that day, spinning me around in the dressing room. Now, applying lipstick with steady hands, I wondered if he'd ever spin me around again. I arrived at St. Matthew's Church an hour before the ceremony, parking across the street in the small lot behind the florist shop. From my car, I had a perfect view of the side entrance, and through the stained glass windows, shadowy glimpses of movement inside. I watched Patricia arrive in a stunning mother-of-the-groom dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. Navy blue with crystal beading that caught the morning sun. She was laughing with her sister Jennifer, gesturing animatedly, not a care in the world. Robert arrived separately, adjusting his tie nervously. He'd lost weight, I noticed. His father's tuxedo, which I'd suggested he wear to honor Paul, hung loose on his shoulders. He paused at the church steps, looking around as if searching for something or someone. For a moment, his eyes swept toward the parking lot, and I sank lower in my seat. Did he feel guilty? Did he wonder where his mother was on his son's wedding day? Guests began arriving in waves. I recognized cousins from Paul's side who hadn't been told about my condition, their faces scanning the crowd, probably wondering why I wasn't greeting people at the door as I had at every family event for 4 decades. Emma's grandmother, using her walker decorated with white ribbons, was escorted to my usual spot in the front row. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. Another grandmother, taking my place. At 10:45, Helen, the church organist and my dear friend, caught my eye through the window and nodded slightly. She'd stationed herself near the altar, my envelope tucked discreetly in her music folder. Michael had arrived through the back entrance, and I could see him adjusting his boutonniere, laughing nervously with his groomsmen. He looked so handsome in his black tuxedo, so much like Paul on our wedding day that my heart ached. At 10:55, the music shifted to the processional prelude. Through the windows, I watched the wedding party line up. Patricia was escorted to her front row seat, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Not one of the ones I'd embroidered, I noticed. She was performing the role of emotional mother perfectly, accepting congratulations and sympathy in equal measure for handling such a difficult family situation. At exactly 11 hours a.m., the church bells began to ring. Helen moved toward Michael, who was taking his position at the altar. I watched her approach him, saw the slight confusion on his face as she handed him the envelope. The church had gone quiet, that anticipatory hush before the bride's entrance. Michael looked at the envelope, his name written in my careful script across the front. I held my breath as he opened it. Through the window, I could see his face change. Confusion, then recognition as he saw the photograph, then something else as he began reading my letter. His best man touched his shoulder, whispering something, probably reminding him the ceremony was starting. But Michael's eyes stayed fixed on the papers in his hands. The wedding march began, those familiar notes echoing across the morning air. But Michael wasn't looking at the church doors where his bride would appear. He was staring at his parents. Michael stood frozen at the altar for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. The wedding march continued playing, but he raised his hand sharply, a gesture so commanding that Helen immediately stopped the music. The entire church fell silent. 200 guests turned from the doors where Emma would appear to stare at the groom, who was now walking slowly, deliberately, toward his parents' pew. "Mom?" His voice carried clearly through the church, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He held up the medical records. "Grandma's cognitive evaluation from 3 weeks ago shows perfect mental function, 95th percentile for her age group." Patricia's face drained of color. She started to stand, but Michael stepped closer. "Want to explain why you told everyone she has dementia?" The guests began murmuring. Patricia's sister Jennifer looked bewildered. Cousins exchanged shocked glances. Emma's family leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. "Michael, this isn't the time." "When is the time, Mom? After you've stolen her house? After you've locked her in Sunrise Estates?" His voice was rising now, years of suppressed frustration breaking through. "Oh yes, I know about that too. Emma heard your phone call. We have a recording." He turned to the congregation, holding up the trust documents. "My grandmother, who raised me when my parents were too busy building their careers, who sold her jewelry to help them buy their house, who has given them $47,000 over the years, has been banned from this wedding because my mother wants her $2 million property." That's when Robert stood up. Everyone expected him to defend Patricia, to calm his son, to restore order. Instead, he faced his wife with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disgust and liberation. "I knew," he said quietly, but his words carried throughout the silent church. "I knew what you were doing to my mother, Patricia. I went along with it because you convinced me we needed the money for IVF, for our future children. But last week, I found out the truth." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "There was never any fertility problem. You've been on birth control for the past 5 years. Every IVF appointment was fake. You've been stockpiling the money I gave you for treatments." The congregation gasped collectively. Patricia's carefully constructed facade crumbled entirely. "Robert, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You never wanted children. You wanted money. And you were willing to destroy my mother, the woman who raised our son when we couldn't be bothered to get it." He looked at Michael. "The divorce papers are in my car. I filed them Monday." Michael walked back to the altar, then turned to address everyone. "My grandmother is here. She's in the parking lot because my mother told her she'd embarrass the family." His voice broke slightly. "The only embarrassment is that we almost let this happen." Then, in a moment nobody expected, Emma appeared in the doorway in her wedding dress. She looked directly at Michael and nodded. "Go get her," she said simply. Michael ran down the aisle, burst through the church doors, and found me in the parking lot. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around me and sobbed into my shoulder like he had as a little boy. "I'm so sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry." "Shh," I whispered, holding him tight. "You came back to me. That's all that matters." Michael led me into the church with tears streaming down his face, his hand gripping mine like he was 5 years old again and afraid I might disappear. The entire congregation rose to their feet as we walked down the aisle. Someone started clapping, Emma's grandmother, and soon the whole church erupted in applause. Patricia had already fled through the side door, her designer heels abandoned under the pew, her carefully crafted reputation in ruins. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael announced, his voice steady now, "I'd like you to meet the real mother of the groom, my grandmother, Margaret Thompson." He led me to the front row, to my rightful seat, the one with my name still faintly visible on the place card Patricia had tried to remove. Emma rushed over in her wedding dress, pulling me into a fierce hug. "We wouldn't start without you, Grandma Margaret. This is your day, too." The ceremony proceeded, but with a different energy entirely. Robert stood as Michael's best man, having finally chosen his mother over his manipulative wife. During the exchange of vows, Michael's voice broke when he promised to love Emma with the same devotion his grandmother had shown him. When the pastor asked who gives this woman to be married, Linda responded, "Her mother and I do," then added, looking directly at me, "along with the grandmother who should have been consulted from the beginning." At the reception, the roast I'd originally planned was served. Helen had secretly given my recipe to the caterer weeks ago, suspecting something was amiss. Michael stood for his speech, but instead of the prepared remarks, he spoke from his heart. "Everyone here knows my parents were busy people, career-focused, ambitious, driven, but I never felt neglected because I had my grandmother. She taught me to tie my shoes, to ride a bike, to be kind even when the world isn't kind to you. She showed me what unconditional love looks like." He raised his glass to me. "Grandma, you didn't just attend this wedding, you made it possible for me to understand what love really means." 6 months later, Patricia's divorce was finalized. The prenup Robert had insisted on before their marriage, despite her protests, protected everything. She received nothing from the divorce. No alimony, no property, no claim to the money Robert had been saving for their supposed IVF treatments. The $47,000 I'd given them over the years was repaid in full, with interest, from Patricia's separate assets before she lost them in the divorce proceedings. She moved to California, we heard, starting over with a marketing firm that didn't know her history. The family grapevine reported she was living in a studio apartment, the kind of place she would have sneered at just months before. Robert and I grew closer than we'd been in years. He came for dinner every Sunday, sometimes bringing dates, always bringing flowers and an apology that I told him was no longer necessary. My house remains in the trust for Michael, but with a new provision. It can never be sold while any of my descendants are alive. It will stay in the family, a testament to the power of truth over greed. Sunday dinners resumed, smaller but warmer. Emma's pregnant now, and they've already asked if I'll help with the baby. "Not full-time," Emma laughed, "but we want this little one to know the same love Michael knew." The handkerchiefs I'd embroidered were used at the wedding after all, though Patricia's went to Helen, who'd earned it by delivering the envelope that changed everything. Sometimes the people who should protect us become our greatest betrayers. Patricia spent 5 years meticulously planning to steal my home, my dignity, and my freedom. She documented every forgotten birthday card, every repeated story, every moment of normal aging as evidence of my supposed decline. She turned my love for my grandson into a weapon, believing that my exclusion from his wedding would be the final proof of my irrelevance. But truth, like cream, always rises to the top. Patricia lost everything trying to steal what was never hers to take. She lost a son who finally saw her for who she really was. Not the busy career woman making sacrifices, but a calculating manipulator who used everyone around her. She lost a husband who chose his mother's honor over his wife's greed. She lost a family that might have loved her if she'd shown just an ounce of the genuine kindness she performed so well in public. Most of all, she lost the chance to be part of something money could never buy, a family bound by real love, not financial obligations. The real inheritance I left Michael wasn't the $2 million house, though that will give his children security Patricia tried to steal. It wasn't the family recipes or the handmade gifts, though those carry forward our traditions. The real inheritance was the courage to see truth and act on it, even when it means standing up at your own wedding and choosing what's right over what's comfortable. It was learning that love isn't measured in dollar signs or property values, but in who shows up at 2 a.m. when you're sick, who remembers your favorite ice cream flavor, who keeps your childhood room exactly as you left it because every corner holds a precious memory. I think about Patricia sometimes, alone in her California studio apartment. I wonder if she understands yet that she had everything and threw it away for the promise of money. She had a husband who loved her, a son who idolized her, and a mother-in-law who welcomed her with open arms, even when she consistently chose career over family. She could have had Sunday dinners filled with laughter, grandchildren who adored her, a place in a family legacy built on love. Instead, she has her career and her emptiness. But this story isn't really about Patricia's fall. It's about the power of truth and the strength that comes from being underestimated. Every grandmother reading this, every elderly parent who's been made to feel like a burden, every family member who's been pushed aside for being embarrassing. You are not powerless. Document everything. Trust your instincts, and never ever let anyone convince you that your age makes you less valuable. Gray hair means you've survived every storm life threw at you. Wrinkles are roadmaps of wisdom, and sometimes the elderly woman they dismiss as confused is the one holding all the cards. What would you have done in Michael's place? Would you have had the courage to walk away from the altar, to expose the truth in front of 200 guests, to choose your grandmother over your mother? Would you have seen through the lies before it was too late? Or in my position, would you have fought back, or simply accepted being erased from your family's life? Tell us in the comments below. Share your own stories of family betrayal and triumph. And if you know someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, that age doesn't diminish their worth, share this story with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let others know that someone else survived what they're going through. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, truth, and the unbreakable bonds of real family.